gentlemen?
Let's do it.
Okay. Welcome to The Growth Project, a podcast brought to you by Amplos. Dr. Drew Brannon, joined by Dr. Milt Lowder, Dr. Cory Shaffer. This is a big one, gentlemen. Now, some exciting things to celebrate, but I think I know where we need to start. I know that Milt and I just feel really grateful to be sharing the stage with the sports psychologist to the number one team in the country, Oregon Ducks. How does that feel?
I'm going to quote Coach Dan Lanning here. Who cares?
Well, while the rest of us are just trying to get a first down here or there every once in a while, maybe kick a field goal, you guys are atop the polls. So well done, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, but we are thrilled to be here, excited to be celebrating this episode. Milt, as you sit and think about the significance of today and the significance of kind of the journey that we have been on with the Growth Project, where's your mind kind of go?
I'm trying not to cry, to be honest. My father-in-law, he's sitting right there. He knows I'm emotional. At my rehearsal dinner, he said Milt and Carolina have a unique relationship. They get in a fight. She goes outside and cuts the grass, and Milt goes upstairs and cries. So that's kind of my heart, but I'm just overwhelmed. If those of you who know me, I don't stop and think about where we've been or where we are. I'm so focused on where we're going. And for this moment in time, just kind of acknowledgement, affirmation of really who's in the room and who's not. I'm so overwhelmed and humbled by all of your impact on our lives, the opportunity to be relevant, to encourage others, to think you have something to offer. We're listening to 113 different countries. People have enough trouble understanding me in South Carolina. Kazakhstan, I don't understand how they're doing that. But just really overwhelmed with gratitude. I think the greatest surprise of my career has been you get into this program or this field to really help others, to inspire others, to encourage others, and to fuel their growth. And the greatest blessing is I've probably grown the most from the two of you, from my wife, from others who have impacted my life. So just thank you all for being here. Thank you to our listeners for listening and giving us the opportunity to be relevant.
Awesome. Yeah, so as we thought about this episode, and we take a step back and it's like, wow, the 300th episode, what do you do with that? What do you focus on? So many places we could go. And initially the vision was, well, let's do a Mount Rushmore deal, right? So like we've talked about Mount Rushmore in various capacities in the past, whether it's, hey, the best teams to ever exist, the best, highest performing organizations, whatever it might be. And so we're like, hey, let's do a Mount Rushmore on leadership. And we started down that path. And then Cory, you kind of put the brakes on that, and we're glad that you did, and kind of pulled us back and thought, hey, let's stay in a similar spirit of that, but let's pivot a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about kind of how we ended up where we did in terms of the focus.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted a topic that could resonate with anybody and everybody, certainly those of you who are present, but also our listeners who will just be tuning in as they normally do. But in thinking about a leadership Mount Rushmore, it just felt like the names that kept coming up that we might have on that list were such usual suspects that it felt like it wasn't providing anything additional. There wasn't going to be anything new necessarily that we were going to give our listeners. And especially since the spirit of today being a little bit more present, I think part of the idea was to give a little bit more of a personal touch. I didn't fact check this, but my guess is if you type in John Wooden or Martin Luther King Jr. into iTunes or Apple Podcasts, like you're probably going to get about 1,000 hits. Anybody can talk about those individuals. So I think the pivot I decided for us to go on was like, man, there's so many other people out there that are really impactful, really influential leaders that maybe people just know a little bit less about. And so it felt like the right path to sort of honor the spirit of where we started, but also to give you guys maybe a little bit more insight into us and just kind of how we think. But hopefully too, learn something in the process. So
landed in this place of leaders that you might not know but should, essentially, and
yes.
Which is what we'll be focused on today, and using the example of some of these individuals to highlight tenets, concepts, models of leadership that are applicable across different roles, industries, organizations, and the like. So you ready to roll on that?
Let's do it.
Get us going, bro. Jump in.
All right, so the leader that I chose to highlight here is Allyson Felix. If you do know Allyson Felix, if you know that name at all, my guess is you probably know her as a USA track and field athlete, an Olympian. And in fact, she is the most decorated woman in Olympic track and field history. She's a 5-time Olympian. She has 11 medals. And of course, that's how I initially knew her. But going back, I guess this kind of started for me. One, this is a conversation that my wife and I had together, just brainstorming. And again, it initially started with Mount Rushmore, and just started talking to her about people that she admired, and her name, came out. And I had her explain to me, and I was familiar with a lot of what she had done, but it was cool to hear it from my wife's perspective on how impactful this individual had been for her. And so, oh man, now I'm getting emotional.
I won't crack.
So
we know.
2021, our son was born, and the Tokyo Olympics was taking place. And again, that was because, of course, COVID happened, right? So 2021 instead of 2020 was the Olympics. So we had just become parents. We start hearing this story about Allyson Felix. Of course, NBC did all their little pieces on different athletes and so on. And she was highlighted for so many different reasons. But what really came out of that was an understanding of how much she was advocating, not just for herself, but for so many other people. So a couple of things here I'll just read through, just in terms of why I think she's a leader that we should know. She was elected to the International Olympic Committee's Athletes Commission in 2024 after serving as an athlete representative since 2022. She's a member of the LA 28 Organizing Committee Athletes Commission. That's for the LA Olympics. By virtue of her standing as an elected IOC Athletics Commission member, she will also become part of the US OPC Board of Directors. And so, again, for her, the story started, though, 2019. She got pregnant with her first child, and she really had to fight for fair treatment. And so her longtime sponsor, and this pains me to say, I think you guys have probably heard me talk on the podcast, I'm a big Nike guy, but Nike wanted to significantly reduce her sponsorship. This sparked huge outrage, but Felix...
Because she was pregnant.
Because she was pregnant, right. She didn't back down. She spoke out. Her voice resonated with essentially a global audience, and the changes that came from there were really, really impactful. And so since then, she started her own brand, very explicitly designed with the needs of moms in mind. At the 2024 Olympics, she actually partnered with Pampers and launched the first ever nursery in the Olympic Village. Like, think about that. That had never been done before, which is like really, really cool. She acknowledged that there was a problem, that she acknowledged that there was a gap, and then she just fought to close that gap. And at this point, she's done competing. This wasn't about her. It was about the legacy that she was leaving for moms for Olympics to come. So when she educated me on all of that, I just felt like she'd be a good person to talk about. So to tie this to some true leadership principles, to me, it really just highlights the emotional intelligence that it requires to be a really high caliber leader. And so emotional intelligence, we've always talked about it, this set of emotional, social skills that establish how well we perceive and express ourselves, develop and maintain relationships, we cope with challenges, and use emotional information in a meaningful and effective way. But the model that I've highlighted here comes from Daniel Goleman, probably the most prominent researcher in this area for the past couple of decades. And you see here he has 4 domains with 12 different competencies. I'm going to focus on just a couple of here that I think we can all learn from or highlight about Allyson Felix. And the first is empathy. So Goleman describes empathy as the ability to understand others and take an interest in their concerns. It includes challenging bias and intolerance and helping out based on understanding other people's needs and feelings. So I'll read one quote and I'll kick it to you guys here for some thoughts.
Cory, real quick before we go too far, as you're here live and in person and listening, just remember that growth process: awareness, action, accountability. As we list these principles and ideas from these leaders you should know but probably don't, think about, hey, what's it mean to you? Where's that gap that exists between who you are and who you want to be? And what action can you take? And then accountability in that process.
So I'll read a quote here from Allyson Felix that I thought really exemplified this. She said, quote, "I just knew how difficult it was to compete at the top level after I had my daughter, and some practical things were really hard. So when I joined the Athletes Commission of the IOC, I really wanted to be that voice for athlete moms and just take away one less thing for them to worry about in the pressure of competition." I mean, to me, such a good summary of what empathy is to recognize this is an area I felt this way. Yeah. I know others feel this way. So let's seek to close that gap.
Am I allowed to speak on this?
No, empathy is probably not your strong
suit. Because the joke amongst our team is that I have no place and it comes to the empathy. But I'm going to speak anyway. Is that okay? So, Cory, as I get to thinking about that, maybe one consideration or would love your thoughts on, especially as you dug into this, is like I find that a lot of leaders struggle to do that effectively. And I think there's a multitude of reasons why that is the case. But what are some of your primary thoughts on like the factors that come into play that interfere with our ability as leaders to demonstrate empathy, think with empathy, and really have that as a mainstay when it comes to the culture and the environment that we're creating as leaders?
Yeah, I think ultimately, leaders are typically so forward focused and so task oriented or big picture, whatever it is. They don't always slow down enough to consider how are my actions, my decisions, how am I communicating, and how does that impact the person across from me? How do these decisions impact the team, and so on? And so to a degree, it's probably a result of just not slowing down, not being present. And it's challenging to do that, of course, when you have a team full of people. If you're talking about especially a larger team, you can't necessarily take 100 people's opinions and their thoughts and their feelings into account with every decision you have to make.
No.
But I think that's part of the reason. I think one of the things that I've talked about with some of the leaders I work with is I think sometimes as leaders, you can forget what it feels like to be led.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add. Or forget where you were or where you came from.
Exactly,
yeah.
Exactly. And that's a challenge, right? Like all you can see is things through the lens that you have right now. Yes. And lose sight of, well, once upon a time I was in this entry-level employee's shoes, and I remember what that can be like. Yeah. When decisions, trickle down to me and how it impacts me at the level that I'm at.
We'll start just with self-awareness. I know you aren't going there, but not very many of us are self-aware.
Right.
And so what I remember of who I was and what it was like is different than what it was actually. And when you think about empathy being defined as seeing with their eyes, hearing with their ears, and feeling with their heart, can you put yourself back in that position? And what keeps us from doing that is, one, a lack of self-awareness, and two, is just stress. That stress makes you selfish, makes you so focused on you cannot see the stress in other people. You cannot see how you're impacting other people. And what I love about Allyson Felix is not only do I know what it feels like, I know what you're thinking, but I care enough to do something about it.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So just for the purposes of time here, I'll hit one of these other principles really quick. I wanted to talk a little bit about under the relationship management domain here, influence. So Goleman describes it as the ability to exercise a wide range of persuasive strategies with integrity, along with the ability to listen and send clear, convincing, and well-tuned messages. So one more quote here from Felix just to highlight that. She said, "This is a great honor, and I'm very happy to have the confidence of the athletes of the world to continue in my role as a member of the IOC Athletes Commission. We should always strive to improve the athlete experience and ensure athlete perspective is elevated in conversations around the present and future of the Olympic and Paralympic movement." So to be clear there, she says, to have the confidence of athletes of the world, like she had to be nominated for this thing from other athletes around the world, some of whom probably don't even speak the same language, right? But the recognition there of her influence and what she had done for, track and field and just the Olympics beyond, I think people clearly saw that, gravitate to her, saw her as a leader, so therefore she was nominated. And as we were thinking about this and putting this together, I think part of what I realized is if you have empathy, man, is it a whole lot easier to have influence. Like if there's a relationship that we have, if I've taken the time to really try to get to know you, if I can show you that I understand your perspective, man, it's a whole lot easier for me to have influence on you. And I think that's really highlighted by her, by what she has done. And again, for the athletes of the world, just take that into thought for a second. To nominate her to see that, feels pretty cool.
Well, and I would just add this. I think that dynamic of empathy and influence, I think where what really comes into play there is when you think about leaders, like leaders can influence people and get them to do a certain thing at times because of the formal position that they hold. Yeah. But there's a massive difference between someone doing something because of the formal position they hold versus I'm consciously, voluntarily kind of opting into this. Yeah. If you want people to consciously voluntarily, like be bought into these things, their likelihood of them doing this, if you are not empathetic, is super low.
Yes.
Super low. So like you might be able to get them to do X or Y or Z, but if you want them like, hey, I'm in this thing, we're in this thing together, empathy is probably a non-negotiable for that.
Yeah, what I hear there is inspiration, right? And so in order to have that empathy and influence, that inspiration, and we know it to be true, we say it all the time, if the work you're doing is not inspiring you, it's not going to inspire anybody else. And so what I hear in the story, Allyson Felix did not set out to be a leader, to make a difference. She set out because she had empathy. She was inspired by it. How can I help other moms? How can I help other people in this experience? And because of that, that led to influence.
Mm-hmm. Well said. All right, let's pivot. I got the 3-minute warning about 10 minutes ago, so we'll go ahead and move forward.
You keep that up and you're going to be stage left here. Okay. All right. So next we've got, let's talk about Jim Elliot. So this is I picked Jim Elliot, and let me explain why. So prior to going to college, the only notions of leadership I really had, like my definition of leaders would have been Michael Jordan, Joe Montana. Like let's go down memory lane there with some great 49ers teams and things like that. And that was simply because I only thought about leadership in the context of sports, like the team captain and stuff like that. And so that I was defining leadership in a really narrow kind of context specific way, and then got to college and, series of events just transpired. And I think really for me, what it was that was the first time in my life I started to actively and seriously create habits and like doing things in my life to grow in my faith. I had never done that before. And in the midst of that, someone put a book in my hand called Through the Gates of Splendor. And I started reading this book. It was written by Elizabeth Elliot about her husband, now then deceased husband, Jim Elliot. And I remember reading it and thinking like, this is incredible. Like this is transformational. This is a version and form of leadership that I've never thought about, that I've never encountered, that I've never even considered. And it opened my eyes widely to what leadership could be, what it really, really could be. And so I would imagine some of the folks listening today are not as familiar with Jim Elliot. So I'll give you kind of a quick crash course on that, but was born in Portland, Oregon, grew up one of 4 kids, went to college at Wheaton College in Illinois. And like many of us in the room probably are listening today, while in college, kind of got a vision for his life. He showed up at college. He didn't know what he was going to do with his life. While he was there, it became clear to him, okay, like I think I know what I'm supposed to do. And what he was supposed to do was to go become a missionary, a Christian missionary, not in a real safe way. So specifically, the calling he felt on his life was to go to Ecuador and minister to a native population called the Aucas, which, to give you a glimpse into the kind of the mentality of the Auca natives, the word Auca translates to savage. So it was a very dangerous place. And he knew what he was getting into. However, he and a small team that he was leading went anyways. And the story doesn't end well in some respects, and yet ends well, very, very well in other respects, in that he was eventually martyred for his faith while doing his mission work. But the reason that, I think about leaders that you maybe don't know but should, the reason he stands out in my mind so much is I don't know a better example of what we call value-based leadership. And specifically a quote that, one of my favorite quotes that I've never forgotten that I learned while reading this book, and Tony Bennett actually quoted this the other day on his press conference. He said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. And I just feel like that quote applies across all of us, regardless of your industry, your role, where you find yourself in life, just the mentality of investing in things that will last is really, really powerful to me, which is why he's always been such a compelling leader. And again, I think an exceptional demonstration of this idea of value-based leadership. So, I love this idea, Milt, you know me, and like it really kind of, it fits the way my mind works of having a framework for you as a leader. What do you like about this model?
Well, one, it fits you, right? I mean, it does. I'm not talking about the brevity.
Yeah.
I'm talking about knowing who you are and what's at your heart and what you truly believe. talk about freedom being living according to what you believe. And so that peace of mind that comes knowing who I am, what I believe, and I have the courage to live according to what I believe, that's what I love about the model. I love whatever lit the flame in him so many years ago, that once he clarified his why, he got to figure out how. Like, how am I going to see this through? And what am I going to hold on to when the world around me is saying one thing? When there's no certainty about where I'm going, what is going to be my anchor? And I think that's so relevant for us today, but really relevant for what he was stepping into.
Yeah, so that word, that anchor word is like the thing, the word when it comes to this. And so I want to kind of talk through here, the three of us, for a moment about the three, I think, benefits, the three reasons why I think this is such a valuable model, beginning with, and you see so for our listeners who are not live here today, we're basically kind of working through this model of you as a leader defining your values and then operationalizing what that word means to you and how you put it into practice. And I think one of the biggest reasons this is huge is it requires you to go on this journey of what we would call kind of personal discovery. Like, you've got to do the hard work. And, Cory, we work people through this routinely, and we acknowledge on the front end, we tell them, hey, be advised before you get into this, before you go on this journey of trying to understand yourself, here's what you should expect. And so, like, what are some of the things that people often encounter when they kind of get into this process of trying to work through their values?
I mean, it's difficult.
Yeah,
it's hard. I think it's hard to separate, sort of the brain, the mind from the heart.
Yeah.
And so many people tend to go through the exercise in such a way where they want it to sound good. They do it for the wrong reasons. It's almost like I want to do it to appease whoever's standing at the front of the room running the workshop, or I want to appease my boss, my leader. But they're not doing it in a way that feels really genuine or authentic to them, like what's actually important. And what we've started to do more and more of, I think, is remind people, like, whatever you value in life is learned. You're not just born and you just, on your DNA imprinted is a set of, like, well, here are your four values. Like, you've got those for life, really own them. That's just not how it works. It has to be learned somewhere. They're probably learned from some really significant people and times in your life. Maybe that starts with family. That could be the role of coaches, mentors, professors, teachers. It doesn't matter. The point is, if you really go about it in that way and start with who are some really impactful people, what have they really taught me? Within that list, you're probably starting to create a set of your own personal values. Yeah. But separating out what just sounds good, yes, to what is actually true and meaningful for me is a really difficult thing to do.
Well, I think maturity and growth means you start taking ownership of the values. They are no longer what was learned or taught. I have to take ownership. And I think part of the journey, what makes it so hard but so impactful, is we can talk about what it is, but what does it really look like in my life?
Yeah. Is it real? What
does it really look like? And how can I operationalize it? And can I stay true to that in difficult and challenging times?
So I think the first thing it really gives us is, it requires us to go on this journey that's challenging. The second thing that I think is huge, it keeps us honest. Yeah. Because I think we got plenty of people that are listening, others that are in the room even today. As you work your way up the org chart, for lack of a better term, or however you define that, it gets harder, not easier. And I think when you're lacking this anchored foundation of clarity of who I want to be as a leader, how I want to show up, as the complexity increases, it's easy to find yourself doing some things, thinking some things, and behaving in some ways that might not at all align to who you really want to be.
Yeah.
And so it's an accountability system. It's an accountability mechanism to keep us honest and keep us on the path.
Well, and ultimately, we talk about this a lot, but people are going to pay more attention to what you do than what you say. So if I say I'm all about this, but every day I show up different than that,
yeah,
it's going to be really hard to have the kind of influence that I want over my team, over my people. And so what it shows is, like, hey, either you're not honest with yourself, or these really aren't the values that describe you.
Yeah.
And I think what's sad, and why our philosophy is help you be better and pursue better, how many people spend time and effort building values for their corporation?
Oh, yeah.
But not for their life.
Themselves. Yeah.
And I think that's a challenge for all. Like, we can spend a lot of time thinking about, here's what Amplo's core values are, but what do you truly believe? Yeah. What is important in your family? What are the things that matter most to you? And what does that look like in your home?
Yeah. And then a final thing I would just mention here is decision-making. Right. I think the fact is the leaders are going to dwell in a gray world, a gray space far more frequently than they will in a black and white world. And so when you are in those gray spaces and you have tough decisions you're faced with, how will you decide? What are you going to come back to guide your decision making about what you do? Because oftentimes, we've talked about this in prior episodes, you are making a decision that does not offer you an option that feels great to everyone. That doesn't always exist. And so again, how will you decide what you do? And I think, how do you create some degree of consistency in a gray world? You fall back on the foundation of who you wanted to be. Won't be perfect, but it gives you a chance, a greater likelihood to live the way you want to live.
Yeah, you spent that time not in an emotional state. When you're faced in that murky gray area, you tend to be emotional and react instead of respond. But if I spent some time knowing who I am and what I believe, and here's what I'm going to hold on to, that's peace of mind. That's freedom.
All right, let's turn the page. Who we got?
So I got to be honest, my man Harvey Gantt is who I chose. And I've been really disappointed and discouraged by the number of people who don't know Harvey Gantt who went to Clemson. I see somebody and a couple of people that hopefully know who Harvey Gantt is. When Drew said, and Cory, hey, we're pivoting gears.
Tell them the story. Tell them what happened here when you're like, I can't do Harvey Gantt because everybody knows who Harvey Gantt is.
Yeah, I'm kind of an optimist. I said, everybody's going to know Harvey Gantt. And Drew's like, you're wrong. And I said, no, watch this. I called my wife, Caroline, you know who Harvey Gantt is? I feel like I should know him. I called my son, who's 21, a junior at Clemson. Jay, you know Harvey Gantt? Never heard of him, Dad. Call my daughter, a freshman at Clemson. Hey, do you know who Harvey Gantt is? Never heard of him. And I felt like a failure as a dad. Because some of you who go to Clemson right now are going, like, you're trying to Google him real quick. Who is Harvey Gantt?
Hey, Horace Grant is the basketball player.
Yeah, not him.
Harvey Gantt,
not Horace.
Different guy.
And Drew was so funny. He's like, everybody's not like you, Milt. They don't want to know the story behind the story. They don't.
That was a compliment.
They don't want to. Okay, thanks for clarifying that. But Harvey Gantt, for those of you who don't know, is the first African-American student ever to enroll in Clemson University in 1963, 9 years after the U.S. Supreme Court desegregated public schools. 9 years later. So go back and think 81 years ago, 1943, Harvey Gantt was born in Charleston, South Carolina, family of five. Father worked in the shipyard under Jim Crow laws. Could not share public facilities. He would not be allowed in this building today if we were still under Jim Crow laws. Could not vote. Could not share the same education. And so his story to me is so powerful because when you go to Clemson, well, hopefully when you go to Clemson, you'll learn who Harvey Gantt is. And we talked about the dignity and grace with which Clemson was integrated. But the story behind the story is maybe it was not quite so dignified or graceful, except for Harvey Gantt. And so as I tell his story, we talk a lot about self-efficacy, and there's ways to build self-efficacy. And that is, I believe I have what it takes. And we build it a lot of different ways. It's one, we have mastery experiences. Two is vicariously. I watch and learn from somebody else. 3 is physiological and emotional states. 4 is verbal persuasion. I see something in you that you don't see in yourself, and I find a way to bring it out. And 5th is visualization. And so Harvey Gantt's father joined the NAACP, and they had dinner table conversations about the significant leaders. Thurgood Marshall came and spoke to Charleston. And Harvey Gantt was saying, I can't believe he's coming to Charleston. And they were paying attention to Martin Luther King Jr. Well, then as senior of high school, the Greensboro Four had to sit in at Woolworths. And inspired by that, Harvey Gantt, and he said his spirit was encouraged by his classmates. So in Burke High School, they went and sat in at the Crest store, at the dinner table, at the counter, and their mindset was, we're going to be fed or be arrested. And they were arrested. Didn't tell their parents until they were arrested that they were doing this. But you know what he said about his father? I knew my father always supported me. Like, he always believed in me. He wasn't going to be mad at me because he supported me. So he fell in love with architecture in 9th grade. There was less than 1% of African Americans at the time were architects. And there was no place for him to study. But he had this passion, was inspired. A guidance counselor said, I think you should apply to these schools. These are the top programs. Clemson was one of those. He's like, that's an all-white institution. They won't let me in. She goes, I think you need to apply, and they didn't. So he was accepted to Iowa State. This is what South Carolina did back then. If they would not let you into school, they would pay for you to go out of state. So they paid for him to go to Iowa State. And being from Charleston, the climate did not suit Harvey Gantt. He said he was miserable and freezing. And he could hear his parents' words at the dinner table echoing in his mind, saying, if you don't like it, why are you accepting it? If you don't like it, why are you accepting it? And so he's like, I got to challenge this. So he applied to Clemson, rejected, applied to Clemson, rejected, applied to Clemson, rejected, applied to Clemson, rejected, applied to Clemson, rejected. And Matthew Perry, who was an attorney for the NAACP, said, hey, I'll take your case. Went all the way to the Supreme Court. So in January 28th, 1963, Harvey Gantt enrolled at Clemson University. And I watched a film on it, and it was pretty powerful. They take the 3 cars up there, police escort, policemen and security, reporters. He's the only black man in the place. And he's getting ready to get out of the car, and he says he's got this unbelievable anxiety. And his father and Matthew Perry and his reverend looks at him and says, hey, son, we've brought you this far. The rest is up to you. But the rest is up to you. Think about the I believe you have, like what you do is louder than what you say. And so he said, I hope I'm just the first step in the ladder. Like it wasn't about him. So he handled it with dignity and grace. And he goes to eat dinner in the cafeteria that night, and the only people that look like him are serving him food, are opening the door. And that sense of belonging of, hey, this is bigger than me. So then he graduates from Clemson. He does, I think the funny part of the story, he marries the first African-American female who ever went to Clemson. So I love how they came together, went to Charleston, co-founded an architecture firm with a white male, which was unheard of, a biracial business, ran for mayor, became Charleston's first black mayor, and 2-term mayor, ran for Senate a couple of times. But he said even in serving Charlotte that I wasn't thinking about being the first black mayor, I was thinking about serving my city. And the one part of the story I guess I left out about preparation and visualization, when they sat in as a senior in high school, they practiced and prepared what it would look like, and they prayed that they would have the fortitude to be nonviolent. And they would visualize the heckles, the cheers, the slurs, the ketchup being poured on them, the mustard being poured on them, the brutality of the police, because they wanted the fortitude to be nonviolent. And so if you see kind of what I put up thinking about this, is as we think about the status quo, that it's so easy to accept the status quo. And his mindset about living in a segregated, he said, I didn't feel badly about living in a segregated society. It was kind of accepted. This was the role that we played. But he started thinking, and with the encouragement of others, there's a movement happening. There's a spirit of change. How can I start challenging it appropriately? And then eventually there's a significant disruption. And we cannot grow without disruption. And so as you guys hear that story and think about this model, what's going through your mind?
It's hard to think about anything other than the story, quite honestly, because it's so compelling and incredible and inspirational. But I think this idea of these layers of living in this world of we're all accepting something. Some of what we're accepting we probably should be, others we shouldn't be. And then we stretch to challenge, we stretch to disrupt. For leaders that are trying to make sense of that in their context, whatever that is, as a leader, like how do you know how to balance those 3 worlds? Because I doubt you can just say, no more accepting, I'm only going to disrupt. I'm not sure how that's going to end. Right?
I don't know anything about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you know where to push, where not to push? How do you make some of those decisions?
To me, it goes right back to what you just said about values. It goes right back to what you said about Allyson Felix of what's her why, what's her purpose, what inspires her. Hey, here's who I am and what I believe. And if things aren't consistent with that, that's how I start stretching out of. It's also understanding there's being content and being satisfied.
Yeah.
Like it's so easy to be satisfied and keep doing. That's where I think when you find yourself being satisfied, it's time to challenge. It's time to disrupt. What do you think, Cory?
Yeah, I mean, it was very easy for me to take it back to the story of Allyson Felix and just, at some point, and it took a significant life event for her in becoming pregnant with her first child to realize that she had probably just been accepting something that had been around for over 100 years. But finally, to just say, no, I'm going to challenge this, or maybe a step further, I'm going to disrupt this. Taking the step to do that, I think everybody can recognize the challenge. How many people are actually willing to meet it head on?
Yeah.
And how many people see that, but then just take a step back into, you know what, somebody else will do it. You know, they just sort of step to the side and hope that somebody else takes the lead on it.
And I think part of the story to me for all three leaders and for all of us in our life, and definitely for me, you can't do it by yourself. You know, I think about, like, I just have this image of Harvey Gantt's father and Matthew Perry and his reverend. Hey, they're with him all the way from Charleston. And you finally get to that point, well, hey, you can do this, but he couldn't have gotten there without them, without that guidance counselor. And so having people in your life that you can lean on is, okay, what's working, what's not working, what's a healthy disruption look like in our life?
Yeah. I think the one other thing I would add to it too, Milt, is that this is true. You see this in the research. You see this just anecdotally with people. The older we get, like, the easier it is to just be, like, continue to be us in a very kind of accepting way, in a very stale, stagnant way. And then you kind of look up one day and it's like, wow, like, I've been doing this for quite a while. And that can be a really, really scary thought. And so we think about the importance and the health needed of, like we better be stretching and pushing and reaching beyond the accept stage. Otherwise, it's just a dangerous place to be.
Well, I think part of our work as psychologists and hopefully husbands, fathers, friends is to help people minimize regret in their life.
Yeah.
And when I think about just settling for who I am and just settling for the status quo, I don't want to look back at my life with regret. Like, that I didn't challenge, that I didn't disrupt, that I wasn't leaving it better than I found it, that I didn't inspire people or motivate people. And so I hope our audience today is thinking about, hey, why are you settling for the status quo? Why are you just accepting things? And how you challenge yourself to be better and pursue better so you can look back when it's over and and minimize the regret.
Right.
And the research really supports you're going to regret what you didn't do instead of what you did.
So I know we kind of need to move toward a little bit of a finish line here, Cory. For like, as far as our listeners go, and they're kind of bouncing this around, we hope in their minds of, okay, what am I accepting? Where am I dwelling in this zone of just constant today, right? And versus how do I stretch? Like, what are some practical kind of final takeaway action items that they can be thinking about of where to go from here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we threw a lot at you today, so hopefully you're taking notes. But I think it probably starts with just identifying, you know, one area maybe of growth, one opportunity that you might have in how you're currently leading yourself, leading others, starting there and maybe recognizing, like, hey, I've been doing a little bit too much of what feels comfortable. I've been doing too much accepting, and there's probably a better way forward for me, potentially for my family, my team, whatever it might be, if I were to step outside of that and challenge status quo. That's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah. Milt, any final thoughts of how we kind of challenge everybody to do something with this?
Yeah, I keep hearing Harvey Gantt saying, if you don't like it, why are you accepting it?
Yeah, that's
and thinking about, like, a spirit of encouragement. So who are you inviting in your life that will encourage your growth? And how do you create that disruption so we can really grow and bloom into who we were created to be and who we want to be?
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I know we kind of, as we wrap up, of course, we need to end with a massive, massive thank you to our listeners. 300 in, who knows how many to go. When we started in 2017, we weren't necessarily trying to do anything other than have a good beginning. And when we look back on, as we listened to the episode 1 earlier today, I guess it was a good beginning, although I was a little embarrassed by it in some respects.
Yeah. As the producer of that episode, I take that personally.
It wasn't the producer. It was the two people on the show.
It wasn't the producer's fault. No, but in all sincerity, very grateful for our listeners and excited about many, many more episodes of The Growth Project. Until next time, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.